Okay, we are live, everybody. Welcome to another Duran live stream. We have Alexander Mercouris in London with us, and we have the one and only Mr. Patrick Lancaster. Patrick, how are you doing today?
Okay. Happy to be here with you guys again. Thanks for having me. But yeah, just been at work doing things that need to be done.
You're going to tell us all about it, and I'm
Yeah.
sure everyone that is watching us is very interested to hear what is going on with your line of work, Patrick. So we
Well,
will get, yeah.
if I mean, I guess there's many different angles we could start with today. I mean, look at the idea of the Russian or the Ukrainian counteroffensive. We can look at just the facts that are happening today. It seems that in Donetsk today, another escalation, you could say, has started. Just already today, there's been a trolley bus hit by Ukrainian shelling. Ukraine has dropped some of the little small anti-personnel pedal mines across the city in different parts. The Olympic Stadium, which thank goodness is the authorities don't let it be used for safety. It was hit right on the main ticket office, and a fire ensued. And as I understand now, they're extinguishing the fire. And very many apartment buildings have been hit already today. And that's just, before 2 p.m. local time. So a lot of things. It keeps happening, and honestly, unfortunately, this happens in Donetsk just about every month and a half to 2 months. Ukraine decides to switch their area of targeting, where they're intensely hitting, and just plus or minus every 2 months, Donetsk really gets hit heavy for a couple of weeks. I mean, regardless, anytime during the in the middle time, there's always shelling, you could say, every day, but not as intense as some times. And it seems and it feels like to me that right now Donetsk is just getting into one of the heavy periods again. I think today's could be kind of the start of it. I hope not, but the next days will tell. But as far as my exact work, the last few days I've been hitting different front lines hard. I've spent some time with Kaskad battalion on the Zaporozhye Ugledar front lines, and I've been with the Pitnashka battalion on the Donetsk Avdiivka front line, and that was pretty interesting. That was the day before. We kind of came under some pretty intense shelling. Actually, a Ukrainian drone had saw us from above. We were about 60 to 150 meters from Ukrainian positions. And we were just in a part where we had to go from the trenches to another set of trenches. But we were pretty exposed and ended up coming under some intense fire, artillery fire, because the drone was actually above us, giving our coordinates to the artillery operators. So yeah, we definitely in the next couple of days got a lot of good reports coming out that need to be seen by the West. But that's just a quick rundown. You have any particular questions?
Well, I think the first thing to say, because it seems to me that as I understand it, this incident, this really rather frightening incident, and thank goodness you're well, but this frightening incident took place in the Avdiivka area. As I understand it, it is from the Avdiivka area that a lot of the shelling of Donetsk city is taking place. Is this correct? Is this correct?
Yes, yeah. That's how it's been for the last 9 years. Actually, the Ukrainian forces, they take positions between the Avdiivka and near Pesky areas where they still control. But for the major part of the 9 years, it was Avdiivka and Pesky that was launching on Donetsk. And, of course, down in the Mariinka side, but that's kind of the other side of Donetsk. And then just some different fields in the middle zone. But as far as other developments. I'm sure you guys have heard about the Ria Nuvis, the Russian journalist that was killed 3 days ago.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I knew him for several years. Is a shame. But unfortunately, we all know the work we're in, and it's a horrible situation. I was actually supposed to go to his birthday party about 5 days ago, but I was on the front and couldn't make it, unfortunately. But it is what it is. We hope the best for his family.
Absolutely, we absolutely do, and I understand there were other people who were wounded in that attack, and it was a pretty awful attack. Can I just come back to these attacks on Donetsk City? Because I mean, what is the purpose of these attacks? I mean, do they have any military reasoning behind them, or are they just intended to sow fear and panic amongst people, or are they intended to tell people in Donetsk, Ukraine is still here, we're still, on your doorstep, we can still show you? Or do they have some kind of military logic behind them? Because, I come back, if it's to sow panic and fear and to give psychological scares to people in Donetsk, I mean, I think that's appalling. I think these attacks would be wholly wrong. And though I'm not an expert in war crimes law, I would guess that they probably are war crimes. But, that's just my view. I mean, what is the purpose of these attacks?
Well, I think it all comes in the eye of the beholder. I mean, you could say that everything you just listed from start to finish is part of the purpose. If you ask the local civilians that are in the areas that there's clearly no military targets around, those people that are under the shelling will tell you the Ukrainian forces are doing it to scare them away and make them uncomfortable and create terror, as the definition of a terrorist attack. Now, as far as impacts on military targets, I mean, of course, we know, there's been many reports that every city, regardless whether it's Kiev, Donetsk, Moscow, or wherever, of course, there are military targets in there. But when you look at the fact of what's actually being hit, when a trolley bus is being hit like that was hit today, I'm not there on the ground right now. Unfortunately, I'm outside of Donetsk, and I couldn't make it to report there today. But if a trolley bus on the middle of a busy street gets hit, then that's probably not anywhere near a military target. If you're talking about the many apartment buildings that got hit, as well, not a military target. Now, was there any military targets hit? We don't know. It's not something that can really be put out there by either side, but we just know the facts. When civilians are under shelling and what they have to say about the fact and how they say they've lived under it for 9 years and how they're appalled that the Western mainstream media is trying to make the West think this has just been this 16 or 17 month war. But these people have been living under this, and there's no question that many of these attacks are, as the definition in the dictionary, terrorist attacks by Ukrainian forces to make the people leave. Of course, maybe there's military targets happening as well. It's logical that there is, but we can talk about the civilian targets, and it's 100% fact that Ukrainian forces do perpetrate terrorist attacks on only civilian areas, not by accident.
And can I just say the other astonishing thing and very disturbing thing is that this isn't covered in the media at all in the West. Before we started this program, I was checking the British media. I've seen absolutely no reference to shelling attacks in Donetsk City. There would usually be very quickly. And, if the media wanted to report it, it just doesn't get reported. These attacks on Donetsk City happen against a background of complete silence. Can I ask you about what you saw in Avdiivka? Because we've been hearing an awful lot about the fighting there. It's very difficult to get a clear picture of what's going on. Is it true that the Russians are gradually closing in on Avdiivka? I read yesterday that they've managed to bring one of the roads into Avdiivka under their fire control. Are they advancing? Is the situation static? Clearly, the Ukrainians are putting up a tough fight there.
Well, yeah, definitely a big fight, but I mean, it's almost like you couldn't really call it a cauldron or, totally surrounded yet, but there's definitely, you could call it three sides of Devka that are controlled by Russian forces. And yeah, I mean, it seems like a very slow progression right now. But as far as on the ground, on the front line, what I saw with my own eyes was, somewhat, it started, we got there, and it was, for being 60 meters away, it seemed very silent. I expected it to be the whole time very active and everything, but from what the locals or the fighters on the ground, which some of them were locals and some of them were from main Russia, what they told me is that, yeah, the fighting, it goes up and down every day. And when we were there for an hour and then left, and by the time we left, as I said, everything just kind of kicked off with automatic gunfire, artillery, drones. I mean, it was the whole modern warfare, the thing you could call it.
My goodness. I mean, I would have thought that would be particularly just, alarming. There's a period of silence and then sudden enormous fighting. What is the mood of the soldiers that you were with? I mean, if you can tell us about such things. I mean, were they confident? Were they, determined? Were they tired? Were they demoralized? We hear an awful lot in the West about how
definitely
demoralized.
confident. There's no lack of confidence as far as the Russian side goes, and that goes for the locals from Donetsk and the draft or mobilization soldiers from Russia as well. There's definitely no lack of confidence in the fact that when the war is over, they view there's no chance that Russia's not going to be on top. Now, the one question I asked them, well, okay, what is Russia winning? What does that mean? And for some, it's hard to answer themselves. What does it mean to have a win for Russia? But I think the bare minimum, my opinion, is based more, it's not really an opinion, it's based off of Russian law. As of right now, Russian law, regardless of what the West says or Ukraine says, Russian law considers, as you know, Zaporozhye, Kherson, Donetsk, and Lugansk all legally part of Russia as far as law goes. So there's no way that Russia is going to end this fighting in any capacity unless the bare minimum of Russia fully controlling all of what Russian law considers Russia, those 4 regions controlled by Russian forces. I mean, by Russian law, that's the bare minimum that can stop this war right now. Now, what will be above that? Only time will tell us. And how long that will be, we don't know.
I would add, of course, the top Russian officials, Lavrov, Medvedev, Putin himself, have confirmed that. So, I mean, I agree with you completely on this. What will the feeling be in Donetsk city if Avdiivka is eventually captured, which seems increasingly likely? I mean, will that lift the mood there? Will that end the shelling?
Well, for some parts of the city, it will end the shelling. Not all of it, because the Donetsk front, it's pretty big. I mean, when you look at it from the northern area in Avdiivka all the way to the southern western area of Medianka, there's quite a big swath of areas that the city can be shelled by, but definitely taking control of Avdiivka and the area around there is going to reduce the shelling, definitely on the northern part of the city and part of the center. But then once that happens, just kind of they'll be going up into Medianka, which Medianka, I mean, it's still under control of Ukraine, but there's basically nothing left besides parking lots for Ukraine to fire artillery from. So both Avdiivka and Mariinka, it's just a time. And slowly, I mean, this is a slow war of attrition, you could say. And, Russia's pretty good at those wars.
Absolutely. That's exactly what they are. Now, you've also been to the southern front lines. And this is, of course, where the great offensive that we've been hearing so much about for months has been taking place. What was your impressions there? Is Ukraine making any progress? How do the Russian soldiers feel? Lots of rumors and talk about all of this in the Western media, but what was your impression of the situation, your overall impression? Are the Ukrainians making any progress?
Every time I asked the soldiers down there what they thought about the Ukrainian counteroffensive, this big famous thing that's supposed to be happening, they almost kind of looked at it as a joke, that saying, well, we don't see anything really like that yet, but we're ready for it. Bring it on. So none of the areas I was in had been recently moved either way. The areas I was in were, pretty much static for the last times. But, and I've been able to talk to many people in both authorities and the soldiers, because I was also in the, I'm not sure if you saw, but the Zaporozhye nuclear power plants.
Yeah.
So that was a pretty interesting experience to see the new situation there, because it'd been quite a few months since I was there.
We'll come to that. We'll come to that directly after this, because that's a standalone issue. But to tell us about, the southern front lines. So overall, static, Russian soldiers confident. Because we're hearing every day. I mean, I was just reading this morning about how the Ukrainians have made small progress. They made some small advances, but if they are small, then they must be very small indeed, because the soldiers there themselves don't notice them. Are there many losses? Is there a sense of a lot of fighting going on the southern?
No, there's definitely a lot of shelling going on in not only just the southern areas, but of course the areas around Artyomsk or Bakhmut. I mean, it had been very long that the area of Solidor near Bakhmut was pretty quiet. I had been there a couple of times, little shelling here and there, but not really a big deal. But now that whole area around there, from what I understand, is under intense fighting. I mean, the whole area is controlled by Russia, but the front, from what I understand, Ukraine is putting a lot of resources as far as artillery and things like that into attacking that area. But obviously, they haven't taken it back yet. And from what the Russian soldiers say, it's not going to happen, and it's not anytime soon.
Indeed. Let's go to the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, because this has been a massive issue. There's been talk about it in the West. Grossi and the IAEA have been there. There's been speculations about Ukraine planning some kind of event at the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, of European leaders calling Zelensky to prevent that happening. Of course, we don't know that this is all true, but that's the rumors. And also rumors on the other side that the Russians have planted mines and bombs on the roof, and that they've planted mines all over the building. And also lots of discussion about how secure this plant is, whether Ukraine can advance across the now empty reservoir. What were your overall impressions?
Well, I was lucky enough. I was able to speak to many civilians on the ground in the city itself, and some of the authorities and workers in the plant. Basically, the overall opinion of the locals themselves is that we can go all the way to the dam, the explosion of the dam. From the words of the locals that live there, an engineer, he explained how it was Ukraine that blew up the dam, and why they did it, and how they did it, and how he knew they did it. And the overall idea from all the civilians in the city is that why would Russia be trying to blow up a nuclear power station that they've controlled for over a year, and it would just make more problems for their military and their people. They were literally the civilians living in this city that Ukraine says they're trying to help these civilians. It laughs at what Zelensky says, how ridiculous, literally laughing at his statement saying that Ukraine or Russia was going to make these explosions and try to make a nuclear disaster. And then I was able to get inside the plant and spoke to the head advisor of the director of Rusatom Electric Power Company, the one that's in charge of that now that it's controlled by Russia. And he explained how it's so ridiculous, not even to the fact of why Russia would do it, but the fact is mines on the top of these reactors wouldn't even do anything. I mean, they can withstand an airplane hitting them. That's how they're made so strong. So he's just saying it's just such an attention grab by Zelensky, just trying to get more attention. It's kind of like Zelensky saw a lot of the news going to Paris and all, the riots in France, and he said, "Oh, we don't want them taking the attention off of us. We need to say, oh yeah, nuclear disaster. Yeah, that should get some attention back to us." And I was on the ground. I didn't go on top of the reactors, but I saw nothing that would indicate any of these accusations by Zelensky to be true about what Russia's doing. Spoke to one of the workers, and he also explained how the situation worked. And one thing I was interested in is knowing, because the water no longer flows directly there, was that going to be a problem? And they actually said it isn't. So that was something that was good to hear. But yeah, the only kind of possibility for a problem with a nuclear radiation leak or something like this is, one, if this is from the words of the advisor to the director of the company, if Ukraine launches a dirty missile or dirty bomb to try to show that there's been a leak or something like that, or if Ukraine targets some of the nuclear waste housing areas near the reactors. Now, that wouldn't cause a huge a disaster, but it would cause a leak. So there would be some problems with it, but nothing like Chernobyl, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was kind of the overall idea of what I found out there.
This is what I've heard as well. And I should add, by the way, that I get the impression that Zelensky's comments about the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, which many people, even in the West, saw as threats, actually didn't do him any favors. I think it annoyed people in the West more than it actually caused support for him. So, I mean, if it was a propaganda game, which I think it was, it didn't work. I think it was counterproductive. Did you see any Russian military at the power plant? I mean, how securely do the Russians control it?
Well, I could say at the power plants, I did not. Doesn't mean they're not there. I mean, logically, they should be there. But I can tell you from my past experience being at the plant and of course, things have changed now because there's no more water in the river itself. But I assume the military positions are generally in the same areas, because they can't just go out into the middle of the mud flats now and be totally exposed. So basically, the whole river there around the area is kind of the front line, you could say, and the same as on the other side of the river. So there's actually a huge gap between the soldiers themselves just because of the river or the mud flats. But still close enough to shoot artillery.
Absolutely. Is there any artillery firing? Just you quickly mentioned that. Did you see any signs of anybody firing at the power plant or from the power plant or anything like that?
No, there's many places around the city and the power plant that have been destroyed by shelling. I didn't see any actual attacks while I was there, but lots of new impacts from the last time I was there 2 months ago. Right. So I mean, there's definitely things happening. How often, you have to sit there and kind of figure it out. Overall, because so we've talked about the southern front lines, we've talked about Avdiivka, we talked about Donetsk. Where else have you been recently, Patrick, which you can tell us about? Well, I was up in the Belgorod area, region of Russia, bordering Kharkov region of Ukraine and the Lugansk People's Republic area, the kind of the trifecta there. When I was there when the RDK, or the supposed Russians that are fighting for Ukraine that are Ukrainian citizens, but they're also Russian citizens, which also seems kind of like a propaganda tool as well. But I went there, and it just so happened to be the first day that I was there was the day that the RDK in Ukraine claimed control of one of these small villages. And so me and the group I was with, we decided, let's go, see if that's true. And we went into the village at the time that they said they were in control. And they had just kind of stuck their head in and left for a little bit. And then over the next few days, we documented all of the military or the Western weapons they had left behind when some of them were killed. And we went to the battlefield. We actually went to the border of Kharkov and Russia. So we were able to make quite a few good reports. And,
Absolutely.
yeah, kind of hard to go through them all right now, but a lot of
you made outstanding reports there, and it was actually extremely useful because, can I just say again, the media in the West played this up for all it was worth, and one almost got the sense that there was huge tank battles going on, and the impression I got from your reports there's nothing of the sort was the case. I mean, I don't want to minimize what happened because people were killed and fighting did take place. But certainly the scale of it was not the way, as great as what we were led to believe, and certainly not as intense as some of the fighting that you've shown us in other places.
Yeah, it was like 15 to 20 people with 2 tanks and an engineer vehicle that tried to come across. Some of them made it across, and then they stayed for a matter of hours and then got kicked out. The ones that lived, that is, and the tanks were destroyed.
What do the local people feel about these attacks? I mean, is there anger? Is there apprehension? Do they criticize their own government for allowing it to happen?
Well, one thing people need to understand about this type of situation with Belgorod, this isn't an area that was, recognized as Ukraine or anything like this. This was, Russia, that Ukraine or pro-Ukrainian forces come across into Russia as they're shooting drones into Moscow and other cities. So, yeah, the locals are definitely very unhappy about this and hungry for revenge. I mean, because there's some of these, as far as the soldiers actually coming into Russia, it was very minimized. But if you talk about the level of damage of some of the border towns of Russia, it's heavy. I mean, there's no question about that. I mean, there's these villages, there's areas that are destroyed that were not part of Ukraine at any time. They're Russian, and Ukraine has destroyed them. So, the people are hungry for revenge, for sure.
And this is also an area not far from where we hear the Russians are now on the attack. I mean, I don't know how up to date you are with all of this, but reports yesterday of a Russian advance across, I'm probably get the pronunciation of the name wrong, the Zherebets River, that they're pushing towards Kupiansk, that they're pushing towards Liman. How familiar are you with all of this, and how is this connected to the events in Belgorod? Because it does seem that Kharkiv region, Belgorod region, are somehow are neighboring regions.
Yeah, well, I try to do my best to report on what I see with my own eyes. So speculation, it's not my biggest strength. But what I can tell you about this situation, in about 2.5 weeks, I'm aware of what's happening in there. So now my schedule's a bit kind of here and there with what's everything, but in about 2.5 weeks, I'm going to be spending some time up in the north up there and really, again, dig deeper into the situation about what's actually happening and where the new advances are, and hopefully get to some new territories and see, what really happened and what the facts are, so we don't have to just so the West doesn't just have to rely on what Ukraine says happened.
Well, indeed, can I just say, that would be very valuable because, of course, reporting of this part of the battlefront is very poor at the moment from every side. We don't actually have very much on the spot of reporting from any side. The only thing I would, of course, say is, again, be careful. But, if you could provide us with accurate reports about what's going on, that would
Yeah,
be
and,
really
and
helpful.
and it's a shame that on both sides there's not much.
Yeah.
All of the Western journalists, they sit in Kiev or Lvov or something and make their reports. And I say in all of my reports, don't just watch my reports. Watch things on both sides.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
because if you're reporting on one side, I'm not myself. I can't see what's happening over there. So people need to educate themselves as much as possible to get as many facts, not just opinions. So that's what I tell my viewers to do. Just get out there and do some work.
There's been some more general things that I just wanted to touch on. I mean, first of all, what about these cluster munitions that we've been hearing so much about and which have created so much outrage, including in the West, by the way? This was one decision by the administration that cut through. Even people who are very supportive of the West's support for Ukraine were upset about this. Have they been used? Are they being used? Are they being used in Donetsk city at the moment? Which would be an outrage, by the way. But and how do people on the front lines feel about these cluster munitions? Are they scared of them? Are they angry about them?
Well, I can tell you, these aren't the first cluster munitions that Ukraine is using. I've been seeing on and off from even the Soviet-made cluster munitions over the last 9 years used by Ukraine. But as far as these new 155 millimeter shells with, I believe, 70 cluster munitions inside that the United States is supplying, I'm not sure if they're fully being used yet. There's different reports about cluster bombs killing people. For instance, the journalist that was killed with the 2 other journalists injured, the word is that was done by a cluster bomb. Now, was it a Soviet-made cluster bomb or a United States cluster bomb? Who knows? But I myself, in the last days being on the front, have heard cluster bombs going off. So again, until I see the piece of the shrapnel in my hand with my own eyes, I can't say exactly where these different cluster bombs were made, but I think that I'm going to be able to find some evidence at some points soon. The more they're going to be used, I'm sure we're going to see them, unfortunately, ending up on civilian homes, because that's just what Ukraine does, unfortunately. There's no question that these 155 millimeter cluster bomb munitions are going to be used on civilian areas, because why wouldn't they? Ukraine uses the regular 155 millimeter shells on civilian areas randomly. I've seen this. I've shown it in my reports. No question, 155 millimeter supplied by the West, fired by Ukraine on civilian areas. So, of course, these cluster bombs are going to end up on civilians.
And they drop butterfly mines as well on civilian areas.
Daily. Today in Donetsk, today.
Which is astonishing. I've been seeing reports that more and more Ukrainian soldiers are surrendering, that there's been more reports that there's been an uptick in the number of Ukrainian troops who are actually surrendering to the Russians. Did any of the soldiers you were in contact with on the front line say anything about that? Or is this just so far reports rather, from media agencies rather than reports on the soldiers?
I haven't really had too much conversations lately with the Russian soldiers about that. I'm sure, it's happening. How many? Not really sure. I myself kind of tend to shy a bit away from the whole theme of the POWs because of the gray zone in the Geneva Conventions.
You're quite right to. You're absolutely right to. Can I just say, and the same goes for all of us. And and I don't like to comment about what these POWs, when they do appear, actually say. I think that's something I would be very wary of getting involved in. And I think you're quite right about talking about grey zones. So what is happening? Are you seeing a big build-up? Do you think that the Russians are planning a counteroffensive of their own once this offensive runs its course? I mean, obviously, again, the Russian military are not going to share their secrets, that the top military leaders are not going to share their secrets, but do the Russian soldiers think that they will be going on the attack before long?
They're waiting. It's kind of that's
Yeah.
a big answer when you ask, what's going to
Yeah.
happen soon. What
Yeah.
are the next steps? And they just say they're just waiting for orders. They say we could go, we could push forward tomorrow if we wanted to, but everything's part of the plan. So we're waiting for our orders because that's what they're sworn to do.
Yeah. Is there any criticism of the military leadership? Now, I asked this question. I mean, I'm sure that Russian soldiers, professionals that they are, will not discuss that very much. But of course, in the West, we hear nothing else. We hear all the time about dissensions within the Russian military leadership, that soldiers are unhappy with the leadership, that they're demoralized, that they're lacking in equipment, that they're lacking in ammunition. You get any impression at all of that? Any hint of it?
Well, the biggest impression that you get from when you ask them about the leadership, and I specifically asked, okay, if you had a chance to talk to Zelensky, what would you say? And I also a lot of times ask, if you had a chance to talk to Putin, what would you say? And the overall thing is that they're very appreciative of Putin and really overwhelmingly believe in his leadership. I mean,
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see 2 years or a year and a half into this war, and they still believe in the president very hard. I mean, I know even when I was off the coast of Iraq, after being there for a long time, there was, some dissident, you could say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they seem to be holding fairly strong in the appreciation and believing in and confidence in Putin.
Yeah. And what about the equipment situation? I mean, does any signs of stress there? Because again, if you follow the Western media, I was reading yesterday about ammunition shortages on the Russian side. I mean, did you get any? Have you ever had any impression of that as well? That they're feeling that they're
No, well, I can tell you in the last days, I can't say exactly what day it was, and the report's coming out very soon. I went with a tank group and filmed a tank group, the whole process from before the orders come to loading the tanks and firing the tanks onto the Ukrainian military positions. Where I was, definitely plenty of ammunition. And most interesting is there was many Soviet Russian tanks, but there was many captured Ukrainian tanks that I witnessed firing on Ukraine. So it was a mixture of Russian tanks and Ukrainian T-64s, I believe. Yeah, and they watched them loaded up. They loaded the ammunition, and we waited some hours until they got the order from the commanders to fire on what positions, and then I, recorded that whole process, and that should be out pretty soon for people to check out.
One very last question for me, and it's one which I've always been interested in because once upon a time, long ago, I did a legal advice set for British soldiers. And one thing that struck me was the distance between a lot of British soldiers and their officers. What is the situation about that in the Russian military? I mean, what is the relationship between officers and soldiers like?
Well, I would say more formal, you could say. Of course, the higher ups, I mean, you get there and, me being an outside person. But, I mean, the fact is, at war, they don't go around saluting each other for one, because, snipers will shoot, the officers in the eyeballs. I mean, it's, so it's more of a relaxed thing. But, when stuff hits the fan, then, the officers give their orders very sternly, you could say. And your orders are definitely followed. But it's definitely more of more of a relaxed atmosphere. You could say overall.
Well, that is interesting. So, overall, heavy fighting going on. How long do you think this is? This is the last question. How have you any sense or feeling of how much longer this is going to continue?
Like we said, with the four regions needing to be under control by Russian law to end it. I'm thinking not less than a year, not more than 3, maybe. But that's just speculation.
It's got
being reporting at a couple wars and being an active participants in a war before. It's one thing I could kind of understand now is no matter what you think is going to happen in the future, everything could stop tomorrow or it could go forever. So just happens to whatever is going to be is going to be.
Well, Patrick Lancaster, thank you very much for answering my questions so fully and so thoroughly. The outstanding war reporter from the West, in my opinion, in the war. There are some very outstanding Russian reporters and some very good Ukrainian ones too, by the way. But the outstanding reporters, but you are the standalone one as far as I'm concerned from the West. Most of them, as you correctly say, they're in Kiev, Lvov, and they give us frontline reports from there. But you are actually there on the front lines. I'm going to hand over to Alex in case he's got anything to say or wants to pass on any questions.
All right. Well, thank you for the questions.
Yeah, Patrick, we said we'll go for around 45 minutes to a little less than an hour. Do you have 5 minutes to go through some quick questions?
We've got more than that. No problem.
Okay.
No problem.
Okay, great.
Take as much as you need.
Let's go through this. Brian, thank you for that. Sanjeva says, take care, Patrick, and God bless. Jay Kumar, thank you for that. Super Sticker Ricardo says, terror tactics is a standard NATO practice. Mm-hmm. Gary says, it's good to hear Patrick and Alex at the Duran. Jamila says, why is Russia going so easy on Ukraine? I think they should be punished. Why is Russia going easy on Ukraine? Jamila asks Patrick.
Well, I think you could say the war isn't going quite as was expected from the get-go. And possibly, and most likely, a lot of that has to do with the support from the West. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The fact that the West has supplied so much weapons to Ukraine has definitely prolonged the ending of this war, and in turn, put many more people in danger, and many more lives have been lost because of the support from the West to Ukraine. Yeah. And that's just a fact. Regardless, what side you're on or anything like that, there's no one that can legitimately deny that fact.
Well said. Yo, thank you for that. Vinay says, my take is that Putin wants to take the whole of Donetsk and Lugansk along with Kherson, Zaporozhye. They hold and then negotiate Ukraine neutrality. All talk of war moving to Poland, and even Odessa, Kharkiv is not Russian intention. Patrick, the talk about Poland and entering the war, Odessa, Kharkiv. What are your thoughts?
I hope it doesn't. Poland doesn't come into this war. I think for world stability, this war needs to stop in Ukraine, and obviously Lugansk and Donetsk, Zaporozhye and Kherson are going to be, as we said many times, controlled by Russia. Russia won't let that happen any other way, but hopefully it doesn't keep going to the West. If it can end with that, then that would probably be the best thing. And of course, part of the negotiations will be Ukraine not entering NATO as well. So,
yes. Commando Crossfire says, thought, could a reason Russia hasn't made a big advance be to limit the area of major damage? It said it would already take years to clear the mines.
It's hard to say. I'm more of just a watcher. I'm not a tactical guy, but I'm just here to show you as it goes.
Yeah. Let's see here. Paulie says EU climate pope Frans Timmermans will be the candidate for the Social Democrats to become Dutch Prime Minister in November election. Thanks. Thank you for that, Paulie. Sanjin says, one thing I haven't yet found a good answer to why is the EU elite continuing its marriage to the USA, to Europe's own obvious detriment? What's the real reason? Thank you so much. We love you guys.
An interesting discussion, but perhaps not.
Ricardo says, for Alexander, would you consider writing a book about the history of the conflict from the fall of the Soviet Union to the end of this war, whenever that was?
To the end of this war, that might be 3 years away. We'll see.
Let's see. Dr. Liliana says, question. Zakharova said journos attacked and one killed by cluster munitions. Journos were investigating attacks with cluster bombs on communities in Zaporozhye. True?
I know they were in there working in the capacity of war correspondents. What they were investigating, I don't know. I haven't talked to them personally yet. But yeah, so it's possibly true.
Possibly true. Daniela, thank you for that. Elza says a question for Alex. After the SMO, when Zelensky will have lost everything, probably his wife too, will you give him back at least the Z? Possibly. Possibly. Let's see. Ivan, thanks for that. Thank you everyone as always for J Scott 6. Thank you for that. Atmos, thank you. Paul Walker says, seeing how the Russian troops sweep the area in trenches, then withdraw with ammunition, grenades, and ATGM, I can understand why Zelensky needs weapons every week. Interesting. Thank you for that. Commander Crossfire says, I think the goal of the West at this point isn't victory on the battlefield, but to grind down both Russia and Ukraine as much as possible, to cause as much death and destruction before pulling out. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, it's definitely, I mean, kind of backs up what I was saying before about just prolonging the war.
Yeah. Let's see. Paul, thank you for that. Valies, thank you for your work, Patrick. Amazing stuff. Thank you, Valies. Alex K says, will Belarus eventually unify with Russia? Isn't this the best way to prevent further Western involvement?
Quite possibly.
Yeah. I would just advise anybody interested in this to watch the interview that Glenn Deason and I did with Ambassador Mirochnik of Belarus. It's on the Duran. And he discusses all those sort of questions very deeply.
Rob says, thank you, gentlemen. When do you think the U.S. will tire of fighting the whole world and simply roll over Canada for the easy tar and water? Yeah, Rob, Air Station, thank you for that. Commander Crossfire says, Putin said he'd consider granting citizenship to Western war journalists under pressure from their home countries. Would you consider, Patrick?
Well, I can say I know a lot of Western journalists have already taken Russian citizenship. And, I think it's kind of a personal, opinion of what every person is to do and should be thought about carefully. But I know a lot have.
Truth Titan on Rumble says, awesome as usual. Guys, Patrick, you are awesome. Stay true and healthy. Free Gonzalo Lira. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Elza says, Patrick, during the last year, is the change in the reactions you get from the West regarding your work?
Well, actually, since February of last year, the heat has really been turned up by the Western mainstream media. Been a lot of, false hit pieces and things like this. But, that was the first 6 months of this escalation. I would say in the last year, they've kind of relaxed a bit. I don't know exactly why, because my work has actually taken off more. In the last year and a half almost, I guess my viewership has reached about almost 39 million. And for the first 10 million of that, the West was really hitting hard. But it seems like they kind of got bored or something. I don't know.
Well, can I just say something, Patrick? I know that in some cases they base their reporting, or at least they report things based on some of the things you've said. They don't always do it in the correct context, and they never give attribution.
Never attribute, yeah.
But I think that they rely on accurate reporting sometimes.
You
And
should
they
issue
need
a
and they
copyright.
need you. Absolutely.
Patrick. Let's see. D1 just says, God bless you, Patrick, and all the Russian troops and civilians praying for peace. Thank you for that. Zariel says, please take care, Patrick, and God bless and protect you.
Thank you.
Amir, thank you for that. Robin, thank you for that. Medal. Max, thank you for that. A few more. JJHW says, does Patrick have any info on Gonzalo Lira?
No, hope the best. I mean, of course, it's any journalist that's held just because of their work it's a travesty to have that happen. Hopefully, he can get out soon, and the West can make Ukraine stop persecuting him because of his work.
Well said. And from Pupas, thank you very much for that. All right, those were the questions for you, Patrick, from all our audience that is very appreciative of your work and loves and respects you very much.
Thank you.
Patrick, thank you so much for giving us some of your time on this live stream. We really appreciate it. Any final thoughts, final words, gentlemen? Patrick, Alexander.
No, I think it's a huge privilege to us to have Patrick here. As I said, as far as I'm concerned, the outstanding war reporter. I mean, there are brilliant Russian ones, and I don't want to detract from that. But as a war reporter from the Western side, I don't know anyone else who does the kind of work that Patrick does, and Patrick does outstandingly well. And the fact that they're taking information from you and republishing it in the Western media, and sometimes even using your own words, by the way, of course, without attribution. Well, that is the sincerest form of commendation of the kind of work you do. Even they have to acknowledge the fact, deep down within themselves, that they draw on your work, Patrick, as all of us do, and we're thankful and grateful to you for doing it.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate you having me. I'm looking forward to next time. And for any of your viewers that haven't heard of me before, but to find the reports we're talking about, they can find me on YouTube, Patrick Lancaster, and Rumble as well. Starting to go over there just in case.
Good. I have all those links, Patrick, in the description box down below. And I will
Great.
have the links to get in touch with Patrick and to follow his work as a pinned comment as well when this live stream is over. Thank you to everyone that was watching us on Rockfin, Odyssey, Rumble, theduran.locals.com, YouTube as well, also Telegram. And thank you very much to our amazing, awesome moderators. Thank you so much for all the help. Alexander, those are the dogs saying it's time to end this stream. Take care,
Good
everybody.
timing. Good timing.